As soon as I finished putting together this video on Tuesday night, Fox News aired a report that they have a source confirming that a 10-year-old from Ohio had an abortion in Indiana. Their source? Unnamed. Their documentation? None. I am entirely unconvinced by this report. I don't believe it to be accurate, but in the interest of being complete, you should be aware of it, and I will link it with the rest of the references in the description. Personally, I stand by the conclusion before this latest report's release. This story did not happen as told. I won't change my stance on that until substantiating evidence is provided. Now on to the original video. Last week, when Biden was announcing his abortion access executive order, it turns out that his slip about terminating the presidency was only the second most embarrassing part of just that one sentence alone.
This isn't some imagined horror. It's already happening. Just last week, it was reported that a 10-year-old girl was a rape victim in Ohio. 10 years old. And she was forced to have to travel out of the state to Indiana to seek to terminate the presidency and maybe save her life.
But in fact, it is entirely an imagined horror. As several sources now confirm, it's a story with its only basis in imagination and no demonstrable basis, in fact. And by now, we all should know better. We've seen this same sort of opportunistic propaganda on repeat for years. Blasey-Ford. To an even worse degree, Julie Swetnick, of course, Jussie Smollett, and for the last 2 years plus, literally anybody who just put on scrubs and said anything pro-lockdown or pro-mandate, no matter how nonsensical, and no matter if they were ever even verified as medical workers at all. Many were not. And frankly, I'm actually surprised that they had the restraint not to dress this story up any more than they did. It could have been Brett Kavanaugh is actually the father, and on the way to the clinic, the 10-year-old girl was ambushed by red hat henchmen who noosed her neck, and it would have been hardly any more ridiculous. As all of these stories demonstrate, whenever sensationalism emerges in perfect timing with a progressive political need, that deserves more scrutiny, not less, and certainly not uncritical amplification. But of course, all of that is a silly thing to say because it assumes that the truth is actually the goal. It is not. A political outcome is. Thankfully, there are still those eager to provide that scrutiny, though, those still interested in the truth over politics. And before I get into this story any further, I would be negligent not to credit the reporter who busted this fake story up. Megan Fox over at PJ Media called it out almost immediately after the story originated, with basic critical questions to which nobody had clear answers from the start. She was asking the questions that nobody else was, and as we'll get to, many of the bigger players just now catching onto the story are all but copy-pasting her work, in some cases without any credit given to her at all. The general story here is that a 10-year-old Ohio girl was 6 weeks pregnant at the end of June, but since Ohio had a trigger law that criminalized abortion at fetal heartbeat detection that took effect immediately upon the overturning of Roe, this girl was supposedly denied an abortion in Ohio and instead had to seek abortion services in Indiana. The story originated in the Indianapolis Star, as told by Indiana abortionist Dr. Caitlin Bernard, who says she received a call from a child abuse doctor in Ohio, and the 10-year-old girl was referred to her because the girl was a mere 3 days beyond the supposed new legal deadline in Ohio. And that was actually all of it, no more than just a few lines of very general information, nothing specific. But of course, that was all that was needed. And so the story was then repeated uncritically across national news platforms. In one case, the Daily Beast called the story, quote, hard to imagine. Apparently a credit to the skills of the person who imagined it. And of course, conservative politicians were challenged on the issue, notably South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem on CNN on Sunday, July 3rd.
Will the state of South Dakota going forward force a 10-year-old in that very same situation to have a baby?
What's incredible is that nobody's talking about the pervert, horrible, deranged individual that raped a 10-year-old. In South Dakota, the law today is that the abortions are illegal except to save the life of the mother.
And you would be okay with that?
Noem was ripped by these propagandists for refusing to endorse an abortion for this 10-year-old, but it turns out Noem's instincts were pretty good there. And not just as a matter of morality and policy, as in even if true, This is so statistically rare that it wouldn't be sensible to craft your broad abortion policy around it, and as in, even if true, it doesn't erase the moral value of the innocent life at stake. But her instincts were also good, just as a matter of fact, as in, if this happened, this is a major crime, so there ought to be law enforcement activity on it. But there isn't. And as Fox identified over a week ago, that is glaring problem number one with this story. A child was assaulted in this heinous way, and nobody is talking about a criminal investigation. In fact, no law enforcement agencies are even aware of this story, apparently. And on Monday, the Ohio Attorney General confirmed there is no such criminal investigation, at least not that he's aware of, and he has been asking around. And his office runs the state crime lab. Bear with the audio, it is a little bit rough.
We have regular contact with prosecutors and local police and sheriffs. Not a whisper anywhere. My office runs the state crime lab. There is no case request for analysis that looks anything like this.
And beyond that, the AG also added, if this happened, it was based on a legal misunderstanding. Ohio law would have offered an abortion exception in this case.
Ohio's heartbeat law has a medical emergency exception broader than just the life of the mother. This young girl, if she exists and if this horrible thing actually happened to her, she did not have to leave Ohio to find treatment.
If this family was so desperately and urgently seeking an abortion, you would think that looking into that exception would be step one. Apparently not. If the family consulted with this child abuse doctor, as reported, you would think that child abuse doctor would have an understanding of the law. Apparently not. But I suppose if that doctor is negligent enough not to report this child abuse to the police, he's probably negligent enough to have no legal understanding either. And that reporting of this child abuse to law enforcement matters, not just in a general do the right thing kind of way, but in a legally required way. In Ohio, if a physician becomes aware of child abuse, and if you know that a 10-year-old is pregnant, there is no mystery or interpretation about it, that physician must report that incident to law enforcement. If the physician does not, it is a crime. So what we're left with is two possibilities. Either this Ohio child abuse doctor knows not only nothing about Ohio abortion law, but also nothing about the reporting requirements that govern his own job, calling into question how he's even in this profession at all, or this abortionist in Indiana just made the story up. She made up a lie about child abuse to sell abortion to the public. And I think the most likely scenario is already demonstrated. This lady loves selling abortion to the public through media every chance she gets. She was featured in a 2017 New York Times Trump hit piece about abortion access. She just finished an interview with local PBS in which the first sentence is a description of her holding back tears upon the court's decision, and at the end of June, she was featured by local ABC organizing a protest because abortion is healthcare. There's no way around it, she said. Her lying about child abuse in pursuit of a political agenda would be the least cruel thing she does to kids routinely, so that's the likely theory for my money. And beyond the legal issues and the apparent running to media with the story and not law enforcement, there are other key reasons to doubt the story as well. It is completely non-specific. We don't know who the family or the girl even are. And even if that is understandable for privacy reasons, we don't even know in what town in Ohio this supposedly happened, or who this referring doctor from Ohio even is. There's also just the timing. This is such a statistically rare event. For it to happen with such perfect synchronization with the decision from the court and through a doctor who's so politically outspoken for this reason, it is a perfectly timed near-never event that's just far too coincidental to be at all likely. And crucially, we have no verification from anybody but the abortionist herself. It is a one-source story. Even the Indy Star, the paper who ran the story, won't explain how they vetted it. No comment from the original story author, no comment from the editor of the paper when Megan Fox was curious about the story and asked them. But maybe that's just because Fox is a right-wing lunatic who works for a conspiracy theory website. No, the Washington Post has now vetted the story too, and they came to largely the same conclusion. In fact, the Post all but stole Megan Fox's work without crediting her. And check out the Post's headline: "A one-source story about a 10-year-old and an abortion goes viral." This from the Washington Post fact-checker Glenn Kessler, as though the fact-to-check was whether the claim went viral and not whether the claim is actually true. But on the truth of the matter, Kessler, looking at the same points Fox did, can't find any. The Ohio governor's press secretary confirms their office is not aware of any criminal investigation in the state, and if it was happening, they say you'd expect that case to be high profile. The Post went to the abortionist source of the story, Dr. Caitlin Bernard, who declined to provide these missing specifics: what doctor referred this 10-year-old to her, and in what Ohio city this supposedly happened. No response from the story author upon request, but a comment from the paper editor Bro Crift, that is new. He says, quote, "The facts and sourcing about people crossing state lines into Indiana, including the 10-year-old girl for abortions, are clear. We have no additional comment." Well, if Bro says it's clear, then it must be clear, bro, because Bro said so is actually the only verification of this story. Beyond additional corroboration for what had already been published a week ago by a reporter in a publication on a fraction of the budget, what the Washington Post does add is a ridiculous pair of closing paragraphs. Without other confirmation, verifying this story is all but impossible. But with news reports around the globe and now a presidential reference, the story has acquired the status of a quote-unquote fact, no matter its provenance. Yeah, in other words, something can be true even if it doesn't necessarily originate with the truth. The truth isn't something to be discovered. The truth is just something that's manufactured and assigned, apparently. Now, to be fair, I'm not sure the Post fact-checker is actually endorsing that manufacturing. Perhaps he's just observing that is what happens. But even under that charitable interpretation, he makes that observation without mentioning that his own paper had several hands in that fraudulent manufacturing. Biden decries case of 10-year-old victim forced to travel for abortion, the Washington Post headline on Friday read, with no subheader to clarify that the implication that the story is true isn't. Jennifer Rubin cited the story in an op-ed column last Tuesday as an example of the cruelty that will undo the forced birth crusade. She said in paragraph 1, "The proof is already here." And in paragraph 2, she referenced this story that is not in fact proven. But that's okay, because after all, the truth is really just what people say it is. It's not something independent of us or something that pre-exists us. If we all agree that the sun revolves around the earth, or that 2 + 2 = 5, or that made-up stories have just as much validity as things that actually happened, well, then all of these things are true, because the truth is just what people say it is. That is a terrible way to run a news outlet, sure, but it's an even worse way to run a society. You do not build prosperity on air quotes facts. You gotta stack real ones. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Gab, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chatting my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.